All right, welcome to this explainer. Let's just dive right into this, because if you think football is simply a game of muscle, speed, and who can run the absolute hardest, you are missing this incredibly beautiful, invisible puzzle that's happening right in front of your eyes. Today, we're going to decode the highly sophisticated spatial mechanics hidden behind the football systems we all know. We're going to see exactly how geometric architecture and tactical intelligence completely revolutionize the game, literally transforming it from a grueling physical battleground into this fluid, cognitive masterpiece.
Drawing from Jonathan Wilson's masterful book, Inverting the Pyramid, we learn a pretty harsh truth. For decades, particularly in British football, the game was treated as a pure contest of physical willpower. But the reality, football is actually a theoretical game of shape, intelligent deployment, and space. It's essentially a cognitive puzzle. The formation, like how players actually move and relate to one another geometrically, that matters just as much, if not way more, than the individual athletes on the pitch.
And that brings us to a really crucial question. One I want you to keep in the back of your mind as we go through this. Are you relying on the physics of force or the geometry of intelligence? Because honestly, this isn't just about sports. It's a fundamental philosophical conflict about how we solve any problem. Do we just push harder, or do we fundamentally redesign our structural approach?
Okay, so here's our roadmap. We are covering the physics of force, Celtic's fluid front four, the Dutch structural reset, Rodgers' modern tactical masterpiece, and finally, the geometry of intelligence.
Starting right off with Section 1, the physics of force, the stagnant battlefield.
To truly appreciate tactical innovation, we kind of have to understand the environment it was born into, right? Before the late 90s, massive rivalries like the Glasgow Old Firm, Celtic and Rangers, operated in this closed ecosystem of cyclical failure in Europe. They were trapped in what was basically a stagnant battlefield. We're talking rigid 4-4-2 formations, hopeful long balls, and pure physical attrition. It was the mud, rain, and bone-crunching reality of who could simply run the hardest and tackle the strongest. But then, the Dutch philosophy arrives: total football. And it's not just a formation, it's this elegant theory of space. It demands positional fluidity, cognitive mapping of the pitch, and a massive upgrade in spatial IQ. You aren't just playing a designated role anymore, you are playing the space.
Which brings us to Section 2, Celtic's fluid front four, the 1960s precursor.
So history usually credits the Dutch national team of the 1970s with perfecting all this attacking fluidity. But there was actually a staggering precursor that emerged in Glasgow way back in 1965 under the legendary Jock Stein. He didn't want his forwards acting like static, predictable chess pieces. Instead, he basically orchestrated chaos. Jimmy Johnstone, who was nominally a right winger, just drifted centrally to create these massive numerical overloads. Bobby Lennox would curve his runs on the blind side to completely shatter the defensive shapes. And Willie Wallace did something absolutely incredible for that era. He dropped deep between the midfield lines to draw defenders out. He was acting as an early false nine, literally decades before that term was even popularized. And to cap the whole thing off, overlapping fullbacks pushed high up the pitch to provide crucial attacking width. They were continuously exchanging roles.
I mean, just put yourself in the boots of a traditional 1960s defender for a second. You're operating in a strict man-marking system. When a player like Johnstone suddenly drifts inside, what do? Do you follow him inside and leave all that space wide open on the wing? Or do you hold your rigid position and just allow him all the time in the world on the wall? This unpredictable movement completely destroyed the certainty that those rigid defensive systems relied upon.
Moving into Section 3, the Dutch structural reset, rewriting the DNA.
Now, despite that brilliant flash of 1960s innovation, by the early 90s, Scottish football had regressed right back into that grim, attritional battlefield we talked about. They desperately needed an outside architectural perspective to break this cycle of failure in Europe. They literally needed to rewrite their own DNA. And it happened as a breathtaking structural earthquake. In 1997, Wim Jansen arrives at Celtic as this subtle architect. He systematically dismantles those fixed roles and introduces a highly sophisticated fluid 3-5-2 system. And then, almost immediately in 1998, Rangers fire back. Dick Advocaat arrives, implementing a strict continental 4-3-3 with highly technical recruited athletes. Suddenly, overnight, a bruising physical rivalry transformed into a high-level laboratory for tactical innovation.
So how did they actually fix that closed system? Well, they installed a completely new operating system built on 3 key pillars. Pillar 1 was breaking the long ball addiction by prioritizing ball retention and patient shape above everything else. Pillar 2, implementing intense cognitive conditioning.
running smarter, not just harder, and constantly scanning the pitch to boost that spatial IQ. And Pillar 3 was driving rapid Europeanization. This structural reset took these clubs from local powerhouses and elevated them into highly credible, genuinely dangerous European competitors.
All right, Section 4, Rodgers' modern tactical masterpiece, the system today. The impact of that Dutch structural reset isn't just dusty history, right? It's the absolute bedrock of modern elite football. Let's fast forward to the present day and look at how Brendan Rodgers has crafted an absolute masterpiece at Celtic. During high buildup, Rodgers takes a standard 4-3-3 formation and morphs it into this incredibly dynamic 1-2-3-2-3 shape. How? Well, he actually instructs his fullbacks to invert. They literally leave the wings and step right into the midfield alongside the number 6. The wingers stay super wide to stretch the opposition, while the number 8s push high. So by packing the center of the pitch, he creates this massive numerical superiority: shorter passing distances, faster play, and absolute control. Even the goalkeeper steps up between the center backs to act as an extra pivot man.
And packing that midfield serves a massive defensive purpose too. It introduces a crucial, absolute game changer of a modern concept: rest defense. Basically, when Celtic has the ball, their 2 center-backs and 3 holding midfielders form this tight central core. So the moment possession is lost, these players are already perfectly positioned to aggressively counterpress. 4 or 5 players instantly jump on the opponent, just suffocating the passing lanes. This incredible structural balance is what allows them to dominate possession without constantly living in fear of a counterattack.
Okay, so how does this geometry actually translate into scoring goals? Well, it is a systematic, step-by-step dismantling of the opposition's defensive shape in the final third. Let's break it down. Step 1. The winger stays wide, receives the ball, and attracts the opposition fullback. This geometrically tears open a gap inside. Step 2. The attacking midfielder instantly makes an underlapping run right into that exact gap. Now, if the opponent's defensive midfielder tries to follow that run to cover it, boom, we hit Step 3. A second runner, very often that clever inverted fullback we just talked about, exploits the blind spot for a totally uncontested run straight into the danger zone. It is mathematically clinical.
And that leads us to Section 5, the geometry of intelligence, our final takeaway.
You see, from Jock Stein's fluid front 4 in the 60s, to the massive Dutch reset in the 90s, all the way to Brendan Rodgers' 1-2-3-2-3 structure today, we're really witnessing an unbroken evolutionary line of the game elevating itself way above simple physical exertion. It's the story of a living, breathing geometric system that just constantly adapts. And it leads to a quote that really anchors this entire explainer: the geometry of intelligence will always eventually triumph over the physics of force. It just perfectly captures how brainpower, spatial awareness, and cohesive structural philosophy can completely neutralize sheer physical dominance. At first, traditionalists absolutely hated these new systems. They called them soft, called them totally impractical, but once the structure actually took hold, all that skepticism just evaporated.
So I want to leave you with this provocative thought. Innovation is rarely welcome at first, but it is always necessary. Where in your own world, whether that's your industry, your business, your daily problem solving, are you blindly relying on the physics of force? Where are you just trying to quote-unquote run harder when you really should be exploring the geometry of intelligence and fundamentally redesigning your structure? Think about it. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you next time.